Thank you, Dave, and thank you for the committee to just having our paper in the virtual seminar. And thank you everyone for joining us today. So today I'm very delighted and honored to be here and share with you a joint work with Troop Howard, who is also here, and he will help with the questions on the chat box. He's from University of Utah. And another co-author is my student, Mengqi Wang, who is on the market right now. So you should, if you're looking for a talent, she is really a good candidate. Okay, so let's get started. So at this point, I believe news titles like this too would not surprise anyone here. We can spend the whole day debating whether it is 99% versus some other fraction number of the nation where homes are unaffordable for average Americans. But we have to agree that the concerns of housing affordability has become increasingly prevalent in recent years. So I've got two quotes from the recent congressional testimony on this side. One on the top coming from the academia and the other at the bottom coming from the industry. Both claim housing affordability is a primary challenge of the US housing market right now. Specifically, the chief economist at the National Association of Home Builders points out a common jumping off point for discussing housing affordability, which is simply we haven't been building enough homes in recent years to keep home prices down. For the folks who are not super familiar with this data pattern, this slide shows you some very simple stats to make the point. The green bars here in this graph shows the number of newly completed housing units per year since 1970, adjusted for population. And the black dashed lines are the historical averages. And you can see the breaking point is the 2008 housing crisis, before which we built around 6 units of new constructions for every 1,000 population every year. But that number collapsed to about 2 units in 2011. And then thereafter, we see a steady recovery of constructions. But by the year of 2021, the level of new construction that we have reached corresponds only to the lowest points in the preceding 4 decades. So new constructions has been and remains very low in historical terms. And this is the backdrop against which we've seen this large divergence between home prices and household incomes. Here, I'm plotting a national measure of home prices in red and median household income in blue. You can see a big divergence in the run-up to the Great Recession, and which is, of course, followed by a big collapse in the Great Recession. But then, again, we see this decade and a half divergence that lands us to the present moment with a large gap between home prices and household incomes. And this is a fact has received a large amount of attention from academics and from policymakers. And there's a set of common explanations that have been explored in the literature. The academic literature probably goes the deepest on the impact of restrictive zoning policies and other building covenants. Other work has explored alternative explanations, including administrative and regulatory burden, geographic constraints, and rising input costs. But what we do in this paper is to provide a novel evidence on another factor, which we show has a large implication for housing supply, but that factor has received a relatively little attention in the previous literature, and that factor is labor shortages. So what we're asking in this paper is how sensitive is home building and house prices to the construction labor supply? And specifically, we are going to focusing on immigrant workers. Any question? Okay. So this is the question, and we believe we have a very unique empirical setting to dig into this question. And the possibly exogenous shocks to regional construction workforces are from an increase in immigration enforcement that rolled out at the national level over a period of 5 years between 2008 and 2013. And the reason that we expect a shift in immigration policy to deliver shocks to construction workforces is that we know a large share of construction workers are immigrants. Specifically, about 30% of construction workers are foreign-born, and depends on which entity estimate you take seriously, but something on the order of half of those are undocumented and therefore subject to deportation. So the increase in immigration enforcement is going to deliver to us fewer construction workers at the county level. And then we're going to view this as a good laboratory for understanding the impact of reduction in labor supply to construction of residential properties. Now, before I move to unpack the details of the immigration policy, let me acknowledge that the whole identification strategy in this paper is coming from the shift in immigration enforcement, which means that we're not going to rule out the possibility that the enforcement itself might be impacting residential construction through channels that are not mediated through construction labor supply. For example, the falling housing demand directly from the undocumented immigrants. However, there are several aspects of this setting that make us believe it is likely that the direct impact is not going to be driving the results that we observe. Let me just highlight two in particular. First, we show that there are replacement population inflows after the tightening of immigration policy. So we don't see any net declines in total population at the county level. And so any pattern of reduced home building isn't coming from there being simply fewer people demanding housing services. Second, to be more conservative, when we connect the housing supply factors to the prices, we are gonna look specifically at the prices of newly constructed homes, which are the housing sector that is less likely to be demanded by the undocumented immigrants. Okay, so now let me get into the policy. So the specific policy that we're going to explore is called secured communities. And this is a policy that increases the information sharing between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities, which sharply increase the probability of an arrested undocumented immigrants ultimately being deported. So everything moves through one central feature, which is the increased information sharing between federal officials and local enforcement. And this is the biggest change under this policy. It might be counterintuitive, but prior to this program, there were in general no immigration enforcement rules for local law enforcement officials. So I don't want to go too much into the details of the policy, but let me highlight two features of this policy that is very relevant to our empirical study. First, secured communities potentially affects a large number of people. Every year, millions of immigrants are arrested. And even if you just did, what you just did is just excessive speeding or public drug illness, you have to be scrutinized under this program. And second, it was clear from the beginning of this program that it will be impossible to flip the switch and implement this program nationwide. And the key constraint was logistical. In order to deport an individual, the ICE assumes the custody of that individual from local law enforcement, requiring coordinating across a national scale more than 30,000 booking locations. And in order to assume custody, you need to arrange for transportation, for beds, and for meals. So which is taking a lot of resources. So again, from the beginning, it was always clear that this program would need to roll out county by county. And here is what that rollout is looking like. Starting in 2008 at the upper left, the first very few number of counties were treated at the beginning of 2013, at the November and October and November of 2008. And this program expanded gradually until the last set of the counties were treated at the beginning of 2013. So just virtually, let's look at the map. Just virtually, you can see that this does not look like an exogenous rollout. It starts more or less from the southern border and then move upwards. So that means the role of the parallel trend assumption is going to be important in our empirical design. And we show in our paper that all the outcomes variables, almost all the outcome variables that we are considering are in fact moving in parallel for the treated and uncontrolled counties in the years prior to the treatment. Any questions so far about the policy?
Dan, do you want to talk briefly, like why did it proceed in this pattern? Was it easier to implement the logistics in one county if they'd already been implemented in a previous county?
Sorry, say it again.
Besides, obviously, immigration being a priority in the southern border, can you give us any about why it proceeded in this pattern?
Why it start from the southern border? Yeah.
No, sorry. Why, for example, the mid states, Virginia and West Virginia, are like the next step, Florida, after the southern border.
Okay.
Why they seem to go, I don't know. They didn't jump to counties. There wasn't some random county in Minnesota in 2009.
So actually, I'm going to refer to Troop if I cannot just fully, because he just knows the policy much better than me. But I don't think there is a particular reason or there is a particular dimension that this rollout is just going along. And also, we also did a lot of check about what factor can predict the rollout if a county get the secured community first compared with later. So the only very strong prediction is the share of Hispanic population. So it seems to be very related to, because the immigrants, legal immigrants are mainly coming from Mexico and South America, and the Hispanic population will just predict their tie with those countries, and think that is the main factor predicting the rollout pattern, and of course that is controlled in our empirical design. Any other question? Okay. So that is the policy we are going to take advantage of. And econometrically, we have an empirical design, which is more or less a standard staggered definitive setting. So let me remind what many of you have already been familiar with. So in the past 2 or 3 years, there has been an explosion of papers that describe a potential bias that can exist in the standard two-way fixed effect estimation. Used to be the standard. So especially under certain conditions, some observations would be negatively weighted, that leads to bias. So in our setting, we have 2 features that strongly predict the existence of such a bias. First, we have no untreated units after a certain period. And second, the fact of the immigration enforcement is very likely to be time varying. So both of the conditions are the prescribed conditions that predict such a bias exists in the traditional two-way fixed effect. So that means that we cannot use that to do our estimation. So luckily, the literature that has described these problems have also posted a number of solutions. So long story short, it is important for us to use a bias corrected DID estimator in this setting. And what we did is to follow the approach outlined by John Gardner in 2021, which is basically a two-stage estimation technique. But our results are not sensitive at all to the specific choice of a particular bias corrected estimator. We have tried other ways like local order prediction, which is becoming increasingly popular. It is also giving us the same result. Okay. And the data we use is mostly standard. First, we're very grateful to Chloe East for sharing with us the launch date of the secured communities. So this is obviously the independent variable for us, which is very important. And our workforce results are going to rest on aggregating ACS microdata from the Puma level to the county level. So the need to have a clean crosswalk between Puma and county crosswalk is going to restrict us the sample to only about 331 counties, but that tends to be the biggest counties in the country, and they in total cover just about 50% of the U.S. population. And we're going to use different measures of construction activities, both intended construction using the census survey-based permit data, and also the real estate microdata from CoreLogic to measure the realized constructions. The CoreLogic gives us the universe of the real estate transactions so that we can actually see the amount of new constructions entering into the local markets. And so we also look at the wage. Actually, wage is the most counterintuitive part of the empirical results. So we want to make sure that the results are not coming from any data flaws in a particular data sets. So we actually collect wage data from 3 different sources: the administrative UI data-based QCEW, survey-based ACS, and the industry gold standard RS means.
Diane, looks like there's a hand up from Eugene.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, great. I was just curious about the data part, that how the undocumented workers' information about the labor supply or wages might be omitted or might be documented, and then how do you think about those if they are omitted? How do you think about those measurement issue?
Okay, you're just curious about the wage or in general, but okay. So I think you raised a very good point about this was I think the driving force of our result is the undocumented workers, and which tends to be hard to capture, especially in administrative data, right? So the survey is possible to get there, and I'm going to spend more time on this. So we use a proxy, which is quite standard in the literature, which is in the survey, you look at the low education foreign-born population, and that just overlap very well with the undocumented immigrants. So that is when we try to capture the workforces, that is how we proxy for undocumented workers. And the wage, that's why we have 3 sources. QCEW is based on the UI data. So in principle, the undocumented workers should not have a UI, so they are not at all at the QCEW. But that also gives us some information because they are competing with domestic workers, so there might be some spillover effects to the domestic workers. So I'm going to focusing on more about the disadvantage or the problem or potential drawbacks for each particular data. ACES that will potentially can capture the wage for the undocumented workers. Ours means, again, it's a, it's a price level. So that is capturing some spillover effect from the undocumented sector.
Great, thank you.
All right. Great. All right. So, okay, now let me spend the rest of my time just highlighting the key findings that fall out of the paper. So the first thing that we do is to document our more or less mechanical first stage, which is to show you that an increase in immigration enforcement at the county level does move out undocumented workforces. And here I just briefly talked when I answered the question. So the first data challenge we met is we don't have a documentation status question in the ACS. So we don't know whether it's undocumented worker or not. We follow the literature and construct a standard proxy, which is the which we think is it's a proxy for likely undocumented population, and that is low education foreign-born (LEFB). So specifically born outside the US and with 12 years of fewer formal education. And we show that proxy works very well. It just captures the overall decline in undocumented population. And if we aggregate our result at the national level, and the magnitude of our estimates line up very reasonably with the overall magnitude of what the federal government has reported for the number of people deported under this program. So that just gives us more confidence for this data proxy and our empirical design as well. So with this, I'm going to document our first stage, which is to show the increase in immigration enforcement has a significant impact on construction workforces.
Sorry, Diane, this is ACS is survey data, right, from the census?
Yes.
So is there a concern in the literature that undocumented immigrants simply stopped responding to the survey after increased immigration enforcement?
Yes, that is definitely a concern. So, okay. And so there are, depending on how you think about how they, so if they just hide from the survey. So first, we didn't found any, documented pattern, how, if there is increased enforcement, how should they respond? But in general, that is a good question. We didn't take that seriously for now yet. And what gives us confidence is, as I said, so we did capture a big decline in the on the LEFB population after the policy is implemented. And if you think they just hide away from the survey, so if if there is increased enforcement, so they are not willing to answer the questions from any government, from any mails that's sent by the government. So you can think of you were overestimating the decreased labor shortage because they are still working, but they just don't respond to the questions. That might be true, and I don't think we have corrected that yet. Am I right? True.
Sure. I think it's also important to highlight that we're confirming the removal of individuals that we know happened from administrative records. So the ACS data is, of course, not the only source of data that confirms that a large number of individuals were removed from the country under secure communities. So in effect, this first stage just shows that our estimation strategy is going to be capturing declines. But Diane is, of course, right in pointing out that there may be some measurement error associated with changes in survey response propensity.
Yes, I think that is a good point. Yes, so it is likely that in the first stage we are overestimating, the decline of construction sectors. But ultimately, we care about the housing construction and also the house price response, and that should not be affected by the first stage estimation. All right. So okay, so this is okay. So we have talked about the first stage just to show you increased immigration enforcement is decreasing the construction workforces, and I'm going to show you that directly. So all the results I'm going to show you in the rest of the presentation will be presented in this event study format. So the nature of the Gartner estimation is to exploit the variation between initial time at which the first units were treated and the time at which all units are treated. So that means we're going to get a contemporaneous impact plus 3 additional years, because in 4 years, the rollout just ends. So we cannot look beyond the 4 years or T plus 3 for all the counties that have been, because all the counties has been treated. So this is the biggest difference from the two-way fixed effect estimation. So I'm going to show you here is the event study of the impact on construction workforces that is measured by the ACS LEFB proxy. Okay, and we use that to proxy for the construction workers that are likely undocumented. And you see immediate and increasing decline in this population. For the median county, this corresponds to a reduction of just under 1,200 workers, and that in turn represents approximately 12% reduction in labor supply to the local construction industry. Okay, so in the second step, we show these declines in construction workforces are associated with large and persistent declines in home buildings. So I will show you first our measure of realized constructions that enter into the local market. So this is measured from the measured from the CoreLogic data. So we are estimating here the total square footage per capita that was sold into the local market. So in CoreLogic, we have a new construction indicator to identify whether the sale is newly construction or a resale of old constructions. And more than that, we can also observe the built year in addition to the sold year. So this will help us precisely pin down the timing of the market entrance. And we see again, as I said, a large significant decline and in the new constructions that was sold into the local market, and the accumulated reduction after 4 years is equivalent to just under 1,200 fewer single-family homes for the median county. Okay, and we also look at the intended constructions using the building permit data. So this is where we don't have, the perfect parallel trend, but the overall pattern is still very similar, and we found a broadly similar magnitude compared with the realized construction. So that just confirms the construction activity is decreasing after enforcement of immigration policy. All right, and then we look at the prices. Okay, so we found increase in the price of new constructions. As I have mentioned, we focus on the new construction sector, since this is the housing sector that is least likely to be demanded by the undocumented immigrants, so which is less confounded by the demand factor. So I'm showing you an estimation that puts transaction price on the left-hand side of the event study, and it includes all the observed hedonic controls that are on the right-hand side. So the controls includes the log of the square footage, the age, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, and we control very flexibly, non-parametrically. And we see an increase in price that corresponds to an upward shift of 14% relative to the median property price. And this is not immediate. It occurs at a lag of about 2 years. And you can see, so whenever possible, when we don't have the constraint of the ACS sample, we just show the results. On the left hand, that is the ACS county, which is about 55% of the population of the nation, and all the counties that we can observe in CoreLogic. Okay, so they just show very similar pattern as well.
Basic question, but how long does it take to build a house? Are you surprised by the 2-year lag?
Okay. So if you just read any report, a single family house, it takes 220 days. So yeah, it definitely less than 2 years. It's not about, okay, I don't have, it's not, the 2-year gap is more than the building period of a house. So it just, takes longer for the price to react to the shortage of construction, the shortage of labor. Okay, so that is the main results. Just it proves that labor shortages have a significant negative impact on home building and impose upward pressure on the home prices. And then what we did, we have 2 more set of results that we want to show, which is more into the labor market and how the labor market is responding to the shock of immigration policy. And some of the results, especially the wage part, is quite counterintuitive. So we first look at the quantity side of the construction sector and try to look at, okay, whether there is a replacement inflows from the domestic workers. Okay, so first we break the labor, the occupations. So the labors by their occupation, and we bin them into high skill and low skill sector. And high skill in our mind is something like the plumber and the electricians, and the low skill is the drywall installers and so on. Okay, so if we just look at the low skill sector, yes, there is some replacement from the domestic side. So on the left-hand side, we're repeating the exercise we have been showing. This is just focusing on the low skill. So if you have the secure community program coming in town, the low skill undocumented workers tend to decrease immediately and consistently. Okay. And then you can see, the side on the US-born workers, and the low-skilled US-born workers is actually increasing. So there is some replacement, but the replacement is not 1-to-1. The replacement rate is from 25% at the beginning all the way to 45%. Okay, takes time for the US workers to, to change their job, flowing into the sector from other sectors, but ultimately it's not 100%. Okay, and the story is very different for high skill side. Okay, so you look at the high skill. So in the first place, the undocumented workers are less likely to work in the high skill sector. So the high skill undocumented worker is not, seeing a very significant change, slightly decreasing. What's surprising to us is that you see a huge decline in the high skill US-born workers. Okay, so there is definitely some complementarity between high skill and low skill workers. So because in the low skill side, we lose a lot of sector, net, if we counting both the US born and the LEFB. So on net, we are losing some construction workers on the low skill side, and that will cause losing of jobs in the high skill side as well. So the story in our mind is that you first need to just frame the house and install all the drywalls before you can just ask the plumbers or the electricians to come to do their job. All right, so and on net, this is a net negative shock to the US born construction workers. Okay, because the high skilled sector just weighs more compared to the low skilled for the US born workers. So this is the welfare loss as well to the US born workers. All right, so not only, so here we not only the number of workers, we also look at intensive margin. So the average hours worked for the average hours that the remaining US workers are working. And you can see not the US, so the remaining workers, and this is the average worker they have worked. For the LEFB, no change, but for the US born workers, they just not only there are fewer US born workers, but intensive margin, they are working fewer hours in every year. Any question? All right, sorry. Am I missing any question here?
Barrett, did you have a question? You raised your hand.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just, drywall actually comes after plumbing and electric. Like, that's all I was gonna ask about. So like, if that sort of timing of like, if drywalls are low skilled, I'm not sure how important that timing is, but that's the way it goes.
Okay. I just did the finish of my basement. Yes, you're right. You have to put in. Yeah, maybe that is the wrong example. But maybe definitely you have to put the frame first before the drywall, right? Drywall probably is the last one to cover it. That's a good point. Okay. All right. So that is the domestic inflow replacement. And then let's look at the wage. Okay, if we're short of construction workers, can we just raise the wage to get more people working in the construction sector? Yeah, this is what we have so far. So we do show that SC program, SC secure community does have a very strong first state impact that reducing the construction workforces, and that is only partially replaced by the domestic labor. Okay, so we are still having a large contraction in the residential buildings. So our economic intuition is that, okay, so if the home builder still because the demand side there seems, if there is no demand shocks, and they should do the same optimization and just try to hire more workers to work in their construction sector. And the way to do that is, the first candidate is to raise the wage. And do they do that? So I have briefly mentioned about the data where we get the wage. So we have three sources. One is QCEW, and that is coming from the state UI filing. So it is not about undocumented worker at all. It is all about the documented workers. But that just gives us some in general market wage information. So ACS, that is, they also report some the wage information, but that is the data quality is a problem. Specifically, the wage is not in numbers, it's in some bins. And that just, sorry, not the work hours is in some bins. So that just tends to bias downwards the observed the wage. And also we have the RS means, which is the industry cost modeling. They use their model to just estimate the installation cost for certain part of the construction. All right. So overall, the conclusion is that we don't observe very strong increase of the wages. Okay. So specifically, now let's just look at the QCEW. So in the first place, we look at all industry. So the wage, so after security community, it has a macro impact that causing wage to decrease. And then that is also, similar for the construction sectors. But construction, the construction is much less compared with the all industry estimate. And if we just look at the relative wage for the construction, we do observe some increase. So this is the only place we found an increase in the relative wages. And okay, so, but still the magnitude is quite small. It's very hard to explain, why, so there is still a remaining question why they don't increase the wage even more to attract the labor to get into the construction sector. All right. So the ACS construction wage, LEFB, okay, very wide estimation confidence interval, so which cannot reject the no change hypothesis. Point estimate is slightly decreasing. US born is decreasing as well. Okay, so they don't raise the wage for the LEFB, they don't raise the wage for the US born as well. All right. So this is the relative wage. Here, no increase in relative wage for the LEFB and slightly decreasing for the US born. RS means, installation cost is decreasing. Point estimate if we normalized by the QCEW average wage level, and relatively it is still, we cannot reject no change. And the point estimate is decreasing. So, overall, the wage, there is, we are, more and more convinced that the wage doesn't move in the direction that we expect. Okay. And why is that? That is, a puzzle to us. So maybe just, two possibilities. One is the builders are, earning zero profit, so they can really afford additional wage increase. But we do observe the price of the homes is increasing, so that is less likely to be, the truth. Although we just don't know what is the cost, the real cost. The real cost, because we don't know the total construction delays caused by the labor shortages. And the second candidate to explain this pattern is that domestic labor is just so elastic, and the wage, you cannot increase the wage to the level that you can just attract additional worker without hurting your profit. And I think this is the answer we got by talking with the people working in the industry. And they would tell you that if you raise wage, you can only just retain what you already have. You cannot just hire additional workers. So that is the overall opinion we get from the industry. But we just don't have additional evidence to show whether it is true or not. All right. Any other question before I conclude?
Just an idea. I guess you've seen Luis Quintero has a paper on competition in the home building industry. I think a paper might have useful data, and some areas only have 2 or 3 active home builders. It's not at all a competitive industry. I think some areas might have more, so you might be able to investigate that first idea a little bit in more depth by using data from his paper on geographic competition.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. That is exactly what we are working. We're now try to get the micro data on the number of builders at the county level, so we can measure the competition level and use that as a dimension to look at whether it is related to competition or not. And that is a great point. Thanks. All right, so let me wrap up. So we have a setting where we found negative shocks to construction workers. And it seems that the shocks are highly persistent, and we only see partial replacement by the domestic labor that's only concentrated in the low-skilled occupations. And we show that this reductions in workforces are associated with sharp declines in residential home building, using both measures of anticipated construction and completed construction. And we show that at a lag of 2 years, with the price increase, the price would increase after adjusting for all the characteristics of the new construction. And very surprisingly, we found no evidence of wage adjustment to attract additional workers. Okay, so that is the overall finding we have laid out. But in general, we think this is a paper about housing affordability, and the punchline, if you have to take one sentence from this presentation, is that undocumented workers or unaffordable houses, you have to pick your points in. I'm very happy to stay around for additional questions, but this is all I have for today. Thank you very much for being here.
Looks like Stein has his hand up.
Yes, quick question. Have you studied sort of how this affects the different segments of the new construction market? Does this affect lower income or lower price point properties differentially from higher price point properties?
You mean high price? You mean like just segment them by the price level, right?
Yeah.
Or the new construction, I think no, the short answer is no, we haven't done that. But I just, I'm curious of what so I can see that we can try to find whether it hurts more for the, sorry, you're talking about counties or within counties?
Within counties, right? So I would guess that this will hurt the lower price point properties more. Like, faced with labor shortages, builders will prioritize maybe higher, more expensive homes, maybe more profitable homes.
Oh, okay. That's a great point. Yeah, because they're operating at the lower marginal profit, so that might hurt more. And also that is more related to the affordability of the houses.
Right.
Yes, thank you very much. That is a good point.
Okay, well, thank you, Diane, and Troop very much for a really excellent, interesting paper. I hope everyone can come and join in 2 weeks when Shi Yang from the University of North Texas will be presenting her paper, More Credit, Fewer Babies, Bank Credit Expansion, House Price, and Fertility. Should be another great seminar. Thank you all.